Welcome to Motivation Local, a podcast where we discuss how place impacts identity. All of this made possible with support from TELUS Story Hive. Lived experience not only shapes how people view a community, but also how they view themselves. The sum of these experiences and memories form a narrative about a community. It's at the intersection of this that we seek to explore how these experiences and memories shape individuals. How has their community motivated them? And perhaps how have they motivated their community? I'm Corey Sotomayor, host of Motivation Local. Our focus this season will be my hometown, Medicine Hat, Alberta. Through a collection of stories, our goal will be to generate an informative sketch about Medicine Hat through the eyes of a small sample of its members. Some of our guests will be born and raised here, some will be former residents that have ventured off to new places, and some will be people who have come to call Medicine Hat home. Each will provide their own reflections on place and identity. Our hope is that this provides you with time to reflect on your hometown, wherever you live. In a story about place, I would be remiss to not acknowledge the land that inspires this show. This coolly carved corridor that intersects what has become Treaty 7 and Treaty 4 land, a meeting place for the Blackfoot and the Cree for centuries, and the home of the Métis as well. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my role at Medicine Hat Public School Division. It is, however, about celebrating the community in which I live and work in, and as with any small community, there will be an intersection of guests and roles that reference my work with the school division. Our guest today is Dr. Sharon Allan. Sharon is a longtime Medicine Hat resident, spending a good portion of her career here as a teacher and as an instructor. Sharon left teaching early to pursue her PhD in education, where she focused on the construction of professional identity in new teachers. Most recently, Sharon has worked with Medicine Hat College, the University of Alberta, and the University of Lethbridge. We're excited today to dive deeply into the intellectual pieces of place and identity. We'll cover what Sharon describes as borderlands of possibility and how this might apply to our community. We trust you will enjoy today's discussion. All right. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you.
Really excited to have you with us today. When I first kind of started talking to you about this and the idea of place and identity, you lit up like nobody else thinking about this. And so I'm super excited to talk about your thoughts on this today, and I think we might go in a little bit of a different direction than some of our other episodes, and I think that could be interesting and additive to everything that we're doing. So thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure to talk about things that we feel passionately about. We don't always have opportunities for that.
No.
So this is good.
This is cool.
Yeah.
So maybe if we could just share a little bit about your connection to Medicine Hat, how long you've been here, and kind of your background here, and then we can get to the meat of the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we moved to Medicine Hat in 1986. My husband grew up here. He was a child here in Medicine Hat, but I grew up in northern Saskatchewan, and so we moved here as almost brand new teachers, having taught for 1 year in Paddle Prairie, Alberta. We moved here to Medicine Hat and began our teaching careers here, and we've been here ever since. Our children were born here. We raised our family here. And now we're more or less retired here. So it's a beautiful home. It's a beautiful environment. I remember when I first moved here having to adjust to the open space, because where I grew up in Prince Albert, it's heavily treed, it's boreal forest. And so you really don't have a sense of seeing vast distances because there are trees in the way. But here, when you drive on that prairie and you see right to the very edge of the horizon, it took some time to get used to that and also to find the beauty in that, an austere beauty of those plains as they stretch out to meet the horizon. So it's been, well, I don't know, how many years is that? My goodness.
We don't even have to do
okay,
the math.
I can't do that math. Yes. Yeah.
Um, when we first started talking about this, we got right into talking about your PhD thesis. So before we get to that, just you taught in Medicine Hat for probably most of your teaching career, and then decided to pursue your PhD.
Right. So yes, I taught in Paddle Prairie for 1 year, and then we moved here. And my whole teaching career really, other than that 1 year, was here in Medicine Hat. I started teaching down in Montreal Street School and then went to Webster and Block and ended up ultimately at River Heights, where you and I taught side by side. And during that time of teaching at River Heights, I began on a master's at the University of Lethbridge, and I completed that. And it had me dip my toes a little bit into notions of identity, especially for teachers during times of change. And how do they see themselves as their professional life changes? Whether that's whether that's a choice that they took on themselves, or whether it was imposed on them by the circumstances of the school they were in, or expectations to move to a different context. So that was sort of the beginning of my whole thinking really about professional identity and how that is shaped by the circumstances of our life. And in 2007, I had an opportunity to move to the Medicine Hat College, and there I became involved with the teacher education program. And I, in an interesting way, people said to me when I first moved there, "Oh, it must be so much easier to teach adults," and it really stopped me because it's different, right? But you learn different kinds of things from adults. In some ways, they're more willing to talk with you about certain things, like more than what a 9-year-old would in grade 4. But in other ways, they're more reticent. They're more to them. So it's a different kind of interaction. And from that work that I was doing at the Medicine Hat College, I began at the University of Alberta on a PhD program. And so that was finished in 2015. And I continue to work in areas that involve teacher education, not so much pre-service teacher education any longer, but certainly professional development and professional growth within schools and jurisdictions here in Alberta.
And so then the heart of your work and your research was around the identity of those new teachers, of how they started to form their professional identity. And what was it that took you down that path?
Well, yeah, I could see one of the circumstances at the Medicine Hat College at that time, and it continues until today, is that there is a degree partnership. And so at the Medicine Hat College, students can complete a 4-year Bachelor of Education in partnership with a university here in the province of Alberta. So when I started, it was with the University of Alberta, and now the partnership is with Mount Royal University in Calgary. And one of the things that I quickly realized was that the kinds of students that were coming to this program were students that hadn't previously had the opportunity to, and I go away to university, right? You know, for whatever reason, whether
like
they were
more mature students.
Yes,
generally?
many of them were more mature. A number of the younger ones were first-time post-secondary attenders, and so it was a big leap to go to post-secondary education, and to be able to stay at home to do that was really important. It was important for them, for their families, but it was also important financially, right? They could live at home in order to do that, and so one of the things that I began to notice with many of those students was a real willingness to talk about what it meant to be a teacher, right? They were encountering ideas. All of them were encountering ideas that they had not given any thought to previously, I'm going to say. And that is the purpose of teacher education, is to open up those kinds of conversations. I remember one young fellow said to me, well, he was young to me, he was in his 30s, said to me that he had decided he was going to stop wearing sweatpants and T-shirts to class because he felt like that wasn't very professional. And it was just a small comment. He was going to wear, kind of dress pants and button-up shirts, and he wanted to feel more professional. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks because I thought, I didn't say anything to him, but it got me thinking about how do we understand professional? How do we understand that word and what it means to be a professional when you come from an environment where maybe not anyone in your family had taken up professional work? They were very successful in the work that they did, but it wasn't white shirt button up kind of work.
Or don't wear white after Labor Day. Or...
Yes, exactly. So a number of those kinds of little things started to happen, and I began to ask those questions. How do you feel professional when you go out on your first practicum experience, your first student teaching experience that is long, it's 6-7 weeks? How will you begin to feel professional? And we talked about that as a class, Okay, so most obviously some of that is the clothes you wear. Some of it is the way you address students. All of that. We talked about that, and it began to provoke me to think about what happens in that time, because becoming a teacher is quite interesting. I'm not sure that there are other professions where the individuals that come to the education program have had 12 or 13 years of experience already within that context. Yeah. I mean, if you're learning to be an accountant, you haven't been an accountant for 13 years, or been surrounded by accountants for 13 years, but as teachers they have been. So they bring with them all that wealth of experience that says this is what a classroom should be, right? Because it's what I experienced.
Some good examples maybe, and some not so good examples.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So it created a whole lot of different challenging opportunities to challenge some of those well-worn ideas of, well, this is how I went to school. Why don't we just continue that kind of learning now? So that was good, and that prompted me to think about where is that transition from being a student to becoming a teacher, and what does that experience? What feeds that experience? What does that look like? Sound like? And then of course from that, how do we as teacher educators facilitate that experience to prompt and provide experiences for the pre-service teachers that will help them wrestle with what does it mean to be a teacher?
And those transition periods, you refer to those as borderlands.
Correct.
Right, borderlands of possibility, and
yes.
and am I to take that? So in that borderland of possibility, like you are ripe for direction, in some ways, right? You're seeking out some sort of possibility, and hopefully that's the best possibility that you can chase, and right. You're going to have that. Can you talk a little bit more about the borderland concept?
Yeah. This notion of borderlands or liminal spaces, or the place between two, one of the metaphors that I use in my dissertation has to do with the geographical regions of Alberta, and
with your grade 4 identity.
With my grade 4s, exactly.
Yeah.
And we would get a map, and we would have big sharp lines, and there would be the grasslands, and there'd be a big thick black line between the grasslands and what's next going north is the parkland. And it sends the impression that, like, that's it. That's it. Like, the grasslands are done, and here starts the parkland. There's a sign on the highway, and it says "Welcome to the parkland," and right away the foliage and the way the undulations of the land, it changes immediately. Well, it's not like that at all. I made, the first year that I was in my program at the U of A, I made 22 two-way trips from Medicine Hat to Edmonton. And I should qualify that by saying that I really do not care for driving. Like, I love to drive around town, but highway driving isn't anything that, And so I had decided that I would do this program at the U of A, and I knew there was going to be this driving. And I remember thinking to myself, Sharon, you just cannot be a weenie about this. You are just going to have to do it. And so in those 22 back and forths, I had a lot of time to observe the way the landscape changed from the grasslands to the parkland, and that it wasn't a definitive border. In fact, there were these places where all kinds of things were living and growing, and then all of a sudden you'd be back in this little patch of grassland. And that provoked me to think about these spaces between you're a student, but you're not yet a teacher. And that in-between zone, that liminal space. And interestingly enough, there is a geographic term for that. And it also refers to the fact that in those in-between spaces, because they are between two established areas, the energy that flows in and out allows very unique things to live. Things that, in fact, don't live in one or the other. They live only in that in-between space.
So like a weird Venn diagram.
Well, I guess, kind of with wobbly edges, where the Venn diagram overlaps.
Are these ecotones? Is that
yes, they are, so that was very exciting to sort of put some structure around these ideas that I was starting to have. And so then the whole research project really was about exploring this in-between space, this borderlands between being a student and becoming a teacher. And fortunately, the University of Lethbridge has what they call Professional Semester 3. And that Professional Semester 3 is an internship. Neither the U of C nor the U of A at that point had this kind of the way they structured their teacher education program, but the U of L did. And I was able to invite students from that were going to be in their internship, where they were in a school, in a classroom, half-time for a whole term. And they quite literally were not students any longer because they were finished the coursework, but they were not yet certified teachers. So it was really custom made for this kind of an exploration. Yeah.
For the record, I was a PS3 student
at one
point in my life, and that was a completely different than my other practicum experiences, because you were there on the first day of school, and now it ended at Christmas time, but it was you got to see things that you just didn't get to see in other practicums.
And while you had a colleague that you worked alongside, right? It was a different kind of a relationship between yourself and the mentor. Well, they don't call them mentor teachers, because it's different now in that particular practicum in professionals.
Ken Rose was my PS3 advisor, I think would be a
better word for it. Yeah. So that. In so many ways, those opportunities were gifts for me to be able to explore these ideas. With students becoming teachers. Yeah.
And so while people are in those spaces, what are they doing? How are they? What kinds of questions are they asking themselves? How are they forging their identity?
Yeah, that is a great question, because of course everybody is different. Everyone is unique, and with the students with the participants that were in my study, it was very interesting. There were 4 of them, and they had 4 very distinct personalities. So and one of them had a false start in the beginning of that Professional Semester 3. So she got started, and it just didn't work out in that context with that teacher that was there. And so there was, I'm going to call it trauma. There was trauma there, because it felt very high stakes as well, right? I've come this far. What if this doesn't work out?
Right.
What if this doesn't get better? So I think what they're trying to do, and really part of the question that I wanted to address was, what is our responsibility as teacher educators, pre-service teacher educators in those times? And that is to ask questions, to prompt a consideration of what kinds of changes are you undergoing, particularly when you started this semester. How were you feeling about yourself and who you were? And then we did check-ins weekly, and then I asked at the very end of those 13 weeks, what have you seen for growth in yourself over that time? And they were able to identify how things had changed, how they had grown, how they had developed.
And so were you working as an advisor with those students, or just a researcher? Not just a researcher, but only
yes,
in the research
I was a researcher.
capacity?
That's correct.
Right,
That's
which
correct.
is probably a better space to be
Yes.
in, right? Because those people, being in those roles, I leaned heavily on whether that was other student teachers that were in the programs and we'd get together and talk things through, or my advisors from the university as well. So,
and also I think being familiar with what they were going through, but removed from it, allowed for a space of conversation that is different. Regardless of how much your faculty advisor trusts you and you have a great relationship with them, there are things that you may not wish to share with them.
right.
Worries you're having, challenges that are confronting you, those kinds of things. Whereas we could have those kinds of conversations because that information was going nowhere but to me, right? Yeah.
And so out of your research, I am recalling there were 3 kind of recommendations that you had made about how to use your time while you're in these zones. Right.
Well, one of the things I think is very important is to be reflective when you're in these kinds of environments, because if you're not reflective, then you're not thinking about the changes that are happening to you, right? You're just sort of putting in the time. So that was one thing, to be reflective when you're in those kinds of transitions. And interestingly, we encounter these kinds of transitions in lots of other contexts of our life. For example, in our family, we have a new baby, and mom and dad, our son and our daughter-in-law, are really in this, like in those early weeks of that new baby, really in this borderlands, right? Because they didn't yet feel like parents, right? Oh, do we ever feel like parents? Well, anyway, they didn't feel that. They were just learning about that. Now, a year later, you can see that it's much different, right? Yeah. It's much different. So we do encounter those kinds of borderlands when I retired. That's another time of transition, another space. You continue to be that person that you always were, and yet you are without many of the responsibilities that you had. And so it's another time of transition, and just being aware of that and learning about yourself through that.
And reflecting, that made me think of when we had our first child, and we were in our 30s, and brought her home the first night and laid her in the bed between us and went, "What are we doing?"
I know, yes.
What do we do?
I know.
And I would say we both had established careers, and I think relatively confident about a whole bunch of things. And now, things had changed for us. Yeah. Definitely in a borderland.
Yeah. Well, even to this day, possibly.
Yeah. Well, and it's those times whether you're transitioning in your career or kids are moving to college and finishing high school. Our producer Turner here is going into grade 12. So, lots of possibilities that you when you see kids trying to work through that too, right?
Yeah. And how can we, as someone that comes alongside an individual who is in one of those transition times, how do we, not because we know about that or that, not that we're offering advice, but how do we offer support? How do we ask the kinds of questions that will provoke them to think about what am I becoming here during this time?
I think you wrote something too about get involved, like whether that's get involved in your community or like while you're in here and you're trying to figure out who you are. And get involved.
Absolutely. I think that, if we take a step back and we acknowledge that who we are constructed beings. I mean, we aren't like plants that have everything inside the seed, and you plant the plant and it grows into whatever it's going to be. We live in social contexts. We live within communities. We live next door to each other, and so when the students that were part of this study were in schools, it was very important for them to be involved professionally in their school. I remember one was so very excited. He was quite a computer person. He was very excited because he had been asked to come and share with other teachers on a professional development day. He, this person who was just finishing up his education degree, but because he had been there in that context, because he had shared that he could do some of those kinds of things, he was asked to become part of that. And you could see how that loop works, right? He shared himself and they wanted him to come and help, and then that made him feel a particular way. And, so I think that that's very important to become part of our communities. And also, on the other side of that, we need to ensure that our communities offer opportunities for people, rich opportunities for them to become involved and to learn from others and to share who they are with other individuals.
Yeah, you took my next question. What's on the other side of that? But if we're talking about the teaching profession, what is the role of the profession or the role of the school or the school system for bringing those people into the fold and encouraging them to be part of things and welcoming them and those kinds of things?
Yeah. Well, and some jurisdictions have very, very robust mentoring programs for beginning teachers. I think there is a recognition, certainly from the ATA, that the first 5 years of a teaching career kind of make or break not just what kind of a teacher this individual will be, but whether they'll stay as teachers, right? And so a number of jurisdictions have taken up that responsibility and taken it up very seriously with induction programs and mentoring programs and trying to ensure that not just that new teacher is being taken care of, but that new teacher has opportunities to share of themselves and to give back. And that's really what that young fellow in my research showed was he was just tickled, thrilled that he was deemed worthy to be helpful to the experienced teachers that were already within that school and within that jurisdiction.
So do you think there's a way that we could take this framework that you've established and we've talked about this in the sense of teachers and the teaching profession, and now what if we applied that to a community as Medicine Hat being a borderland of possibility, and maybe work through an example where it's people new to a community, new to that. Well, we are very much a borderland, or sometimes a forgotten corner, we like to call ourselves. Do you think that would work?
Oh, I think absolutely. So I know that at the library, lots of individuals come to the library that are new to Canada, not just new to Medicine Hat, and not new just to Alberta, but new to Canada. They're newcomers. And you can imagine, oh my goodness, their whole life must be a borderlands, right? You know, they come to the library, they're looking, and I know they go to other places in Medicine Hat as well, but they come looking for not just help with filling out forms. They're looking for ways to become part of the culture, to learn about what does it mean to be here in Medicine Hat? What does it mean to be a hatter,
Right.
as we sometimes say?
Yeah.
So I think that I'm not sure whether Medicine Hat is the borderlands, but the certain experiences of our life place us in those times of transition. Right. And indeed, this as a metaphor for things that happen here in Medicine Hat, for sure, could work.
Is that culture, or I don't know if that word works there?
Well, I think I spend a lot of time in my dissertation talking about what is culture and where does it come from and the importance of culture, because, culture really is the air we breathe. We don't know what it is sometimes until we move somewhere else or go somewhere else, and all of a sudden we're displaced. We see things with new eyes. So I think that yes, there is that, but also it isn't like culture is this thing that we figure out, and then once we figure it out, we become part of it. It's also a toing and froing, right? As we're engaging with that culture, we're changing it because we're bringing our own culture and our own understandings. And I think that becomes particularly obvious with newcomers to Canada. Right, you see them trying to understand what does it mean to live here, but they also have the ways that they live where they came from, and they bring that and try to find a way of negotiating that space.
And maybe as much as people might want culture to be a static thing,
yes,
that's impossible.
I think it is impossible. I think it is. I think. There's lots of talk about, well, what is Canadian culture, right? Because every time something comes up, we say, well, that doesn't fit in Canadian culture. And yet then the conversation is, well, what is Canadian culture? But I think the reality is that these things are changing, and they're adapting, and they're flexible, so that they can't be, pegged down. I think it is possible, though, to talk about what are Canadian values. What do we value here in Canada or in Alberta? What do we value? And that then can become the threads of conversation that you can have with people. I don't know that we can say, this is our culture, and here's the culture box. Here, I'm going to give you this box of culture. Because as soon as you open it, it's changing.
So in that way, are values drivers of identity?
Or does identity drive our values?
Right. Yeah.
I think I really I think the arrows go both ways.
Right.
Both ways. Yeah.
I had interviewed my Di Wilkins for this, and we talked about her role as a CEO and helping a company decide what its values are or identify its values, and then from there make a plan about how they want to exist in the world. And we talked a little bit, could Medicine Hat do that? And she's been gone from here for a long time, and so wasn't going to jump into that, but for sure that worked with other communities where that was a thing, that you would identify what are the things that we value as a community, and use that as leverage for either attracting business to the community or making plans on how you grow all of those pieces. And I think that's an interesting point, is your identity probably impacts your values. What if you were looking to alter your identity?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What would be the purpose of that?
I don't know. I was thinking of city council.
Well, interestingly enough, I have this in my head as well. And what I was going to say about 45 seconds ago is that there's probably no more appropriate time than to have this kind of a conversation. And how do we create, well, I've heard, a tent that's big enough so that a tent of values that is comprehensive enough that all people can come under that tent in one way or another, right? And I think that will require skill on the part of individuals to draw those voices into the conversation. But yes, I agree. And you remember, I mean, well, I'm sure you remember back at River Heights in those early days, you know, it was often we would say, well, we have this opportunity to become involved in something, Science Alberta Foundation. Right. How does that involvement fit with what we have agreed are our values here in this school, or our direction here in this school? And so things were measured by what we said, right? And as it turned out, we did get involved with the Science Alberta Foundation because it fit within the kinds of the tent that we had built around our school. And I think that for sure we could do that here in Medicine Hat. Yeah. But it also requires compromise, right? It's going to require people to be willing to also talk to different kinds of people. Remember years ago, Dave Hancock, when he was the Minister of Education, and Inspiring Education, that's what it was. I don't even remember what year that was. Maybe like 2009, 2010, somewhere there. And all over the province, not all at once, but there would be conversations in big rooms, like here in Medicine Hat. Yeah, it was at the lodge. And there were round tables, and you walked in, and they had been very intentional about where people were going to sit. So you didn't have just a table of teachers or just a table of businessmen over here, all kind of saying the same things. Everything was mixed up so that we sat with a business person and maybe a doctor and maybe someone who worked in IXL Industries. And, you know, and you had the conversation about what do we want education in our province and here in Medicine Hat to be like. Those kinds of conversations are really important. And it looked a little haphazard when you walked into the great big meeting, like one of those ballrooms, right, where all the walls were pushed back. But it was anything but haphazard. It was very carefully, intentionally created so that people had conversations with individuals they would not have likely had conversations with in their day-to-day life. That, I think, we need to do. I feel that's so important for me to hear from people. I mean, most of my family are teachers. Most of my friends are teachers. Dinner parties are getting a little bit boring because everybody is saying exactly the same kinds of things. Yeah. So it's really good to have different perspectives and to be open to them and to try to puzzle out, how could that work?
If your identity is a bunch of silos, it's probably not helpful.
No, and then I think we run into difficulties with people that hang on to that, right? And maybe that's some of what we're seeing. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So with your research, what questions were left unanswered for you?
Well,
or what might be a question? No, don't tell me all of the questions.
All of the questions, yes. Yeah. Oh. I think one of the questions that still sits in the back of my mind has to do with how we open up those kinds of conversations with individuals that are very different from us. You know, as a researcher, you have you really have an opportunity because you're a researcher and you could pretty much ask anything and they would do their best to answer your questions, and just not unlike like you here today, host, like a podcaster, exactly. But in our everyday life, how do we have those kinds of conversations that reach out to people and encourage them to talk about the things that are important to them? I mean, can those kinds of things happen in the grocery store? Maybe they can. Maybe it's a set of skills that we need to develop. Maybe we need to have enough commonality amongst all of us that we can talk about those things. I don't know. So
flipping the script a little bit. How about questions that you have for me, or things that you thought about ahead of time because you were pumped to talk about this, that you wanna chat about?
Well, one of the things, as I was thinking about this, and you can see I've got some notes here, I've been quite interested in the work of Stanley Coopersmith. Now, it was from the 1960s, but it has more recently been taken up by individuals like Martin Brokenleg, The Circle of Courage,
right.
and talking about self-esteem and how do we facilitate self-esteem in schools with our students, right? But it's not just that; it's our own children. It's each other, even really. And one of the components of that is virtue, and that it feels like such an old-fashioned word, virtue. Like I actually had to look up the definition of it because, what is that? But essentially, it's about offering individuals the opportunity to give back with no expectation that they will receive something in return. So in other words, inviting them to become essentially involved in the lives of others for good work, with generosity. And I do wonder about whether we, in our schools or here in Medicine Hat, have those kinds of opportunities for all people to help. Do you remember when we'd be teaching and we'd have, this kid who couldn't sit still or couldn't pay attention, and one of the things that we would do is we would give them jobs to do, things that they were going to be responsible for. I mean, I remember, sometimes it was something as simple as being in charge of the skipping rope at recess time, or being in charge of the big red rubber ball. But it was something that they then took up as their work. And I just wonder if some of that has been lost, or if we could, or let me rephrase that, if there would be ways that we could think about that so that individuals can become involved in the lives of people that they wouldn't normally be part of.
Have you, do you read anything on what's Adler, the psychologist?
Yes, right.
And I listened to a book on tape on the way home from Edmonton because there's enough time on a road home. You would know this.
I know that.
To listen to an entire book. And the book is called The Courage to Be Disliked. And it was actually by two Japanese authors, and it's written as a Socratic discussion between a professor and a youth about Adler's beliefs. And that, he fundamentally didn't believe in trauma. And obviously this is like from the 20s, and so there might be some parts that he didn't know.
Right.
But did fundamentally believe that everything is about relationships, that everything is about the relationships between people, and that for that to work, all relationships need to be horizontal and not vertical.
Right.
And no relationships can be built on reward or punishment. And that you would do things just for the sake of doing them. In fact, you wouldn't do them so that people would give you praise. You would just do them because they're the right thing to do.
Right.
Or you wouldn't do them because someone said, if you don't do this, you're going to be in big trouble. And so some of it is a parenting book in some ways. I guess I had no idea this is what I was going to be listening to. But it's also just about how we make our way through the world and how we organize ourselves, and it gets eventually to the heart of self-esteem, and whether you have high self-esteem or low self-esteem, and how you move through the world and let those interactions decide, well, you're ultimately deciding, according to him, whether you're going to have low self-esteem or high self-esteem. And so it was a fascinating listen, because I'm not even sure that I agree with everything that I heard, because at the start it just was like, this sounds like really tough medicine.
Yeah.
Is what it sounds like. But you could see what the goal was, is to treat people equally and fairly.
Right.
And that makes the world a better place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, virtue then becomes a key part of that, right? Responding and acting towards others in ways that there's nothing in it for you, right? It's just,
Did you do the training with Dr. Martin Brokenleg?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Yeah.
And people who have, it really impacted them for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, and we used Coopersmith's model, and which has been taken up, and not just by Martin Brokenleg, but by others as well, and really thought about how would we as a teacher build into our classrooms opportunities for children to feel competent, right? To demonstrate agency, to contribute in ways that would be called virtuous, right? Those kinds of things, because sometimes, self-esteem sounds like such an esoteric thing, right? It's out here, and yet it's remarkably, the essence often of who we are. How do we see ourselves and our worthiness or lack of worthiness?
Other conclusions from your paper that you think would really fit this topic?
Vygotsky talks a lot about the more skilled peer, right? And in education terms, we talk about scaffolding things and
zones of
proximal development, and all of that. Yeah. But the notion that if we grow and develop within relationships, within our social context, then it's critically important that we are committed one to each other, that we understand we don't have to be more skilled, right? We just need to be alongside them. Although I would imagine that if I was going to learn how to golf, you would be my more skilled colleague, right? But it's very important for that. And so I wonder here in Medicine Hat whether there's ways of bringing people together that can support. I'm sure that there are some of those things there already here. I just don't know about them. And maybe they need to become more front and center. Maybe we need to find ways to connect people across. I said this. I guess this. I'm coming back to some of the same things.
So was that Strong Towns movement?
Yeah, and I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know where that's at.
I don't know where that's at. It certainly seemed to start off very, very strong, but I don't know. And I think, sadly, a lot of the difficulty that exists within those relationships has taken energy away from some other things that probably are more in need of attention.
Do you think an identity can be defined by the things that you are, but also by the things that you aren't?
I think we always do that, don't we? We see ourselves as this, but not that. And I think that's often where we get into difficulty is when we begin to look more at what we're not and less at what we are. Right? So can I think of an example? Can you think of an example?
That's like you would hope for people to be thinking about abundance, right?
Right.
Versus, I think even that little joke I made earlier, a forgotten corner, right?
Right.
Like you feel like the undervalued stepchild or something that if you're going to view the world or identify yourself as that in the world, people are going to see you, I think, in a different way versus someone who struts with confidence or believes in themselves or puts themselves out there. Like those are much different approaches to living.
You know, in a way, that was how I overcame the lack of trees here. You know, the trees were not going to sprout up on the prairie, right? And so, you know, it was one thing to say, well, you know, I'm from the north and there are lots of trees and so on. But finding the beauty in what's here, right? So seeing what you have rather than what isn't there. And I do worry a little bit that's a kind of well-worn argument that we have, that we're the forgotten corner here in southeastern Alberta. And I remember there was a superintendent who used to say in Medicine Hat, you know, it's a made in Medicine Hat solution, right? Because we felt so away from, we weren't close to Calgary, we weren't close to Edmonton, we were maybe a little bit closer to Lethbridge, but it felt like we were here all on our own. And so sometimes we made solutions here. Some of them worked and others didn't. But it was a kind of agency, right? You know, we were acting on where we were as opposed to, oh dear, you know, I mean, our MLAs don't even come and visit us. Right. My MLA doesn't live in this part of the world. Right. So, you know, so we could focus on that rather than, or we could say, this is what we have. This is where we are. There are so many wonderful parts of Medicine Hat, and I think that we're just a great size, right? You know, too big and it's hard to get people together. Too small and you know, but there's growing diversity here in our city, and we need to celebrate that.
I've this summer, and this is I would honestly say this is the first time I've encountered this, and I've encountered it maybe close to 10 or 12 times, where you're making small talk with somebody. Oh, how's the summer going? Are you guys planning to go anywhere? Did you go anywhere? And many people saying, why would I go anywhere in the summer? Like, Medicine Hat's awesome in the summertime. Like, people should be coming here.
Yes.
I need to go away in the wintertime, but but yeah, there's things I don't need to escape here. And I just thought, like, either people are having that conversation out there a lot and it's just kind of filtering its way back. But I've heard that over and over from people this summer, and they're right. There are lots of great things to do in this community year round, truly.
Yes.
But definitely in the summertime as well.
Yeah.
Even though you just got back from Toronto.
Well, yes. Well, where the humidity is like 87%. Yes. Yeah. So yes, Medicine Hat, it's got a dry heat, and we like that. Yes. Yeah. Well, and of course, people travel away for lots of different reasons, but certainly for us, we love to stay here in the summertime and from the spring through till the fall, because the weather is so great, and it's where we're rooted. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's about our rootedness. And how do we help individuals? Like, if we use that kind of how do we help people that are coming to Medicine Hat or are new to Medicine Hat put down those roots and put them down into real good earth where they'll be fed, right? You know, where they're not just their physical needs will be met, but their needs for beauty, their needs for friendship, their needs for, being together, for all of that. How do we do that?
Because I think back to your professional teacher part, there's the role of the individual to plant and grow and become part of something. But there's also the role of the profession or the community for encouraging people to take part and welcome them in and do those pieces so that you can, I guess, maybe, as I think through the identity piece, see yourself in the community.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And is the tent large enough for all of these people to come inside, right? Do they feel welcome to do that? Do they share those values? Yeah.
What's other than avoiding the word pensioner? As per your daughter.
Pensioner.
What's next for you?
Oh, well, so we are going to Ottawa in October, and Jocelyn has just moved there. She and her partner have moved to Ottawa, and we're excited about that. We like Ottawa. It's a beautiful city. I would really encourage anybody who hasn't been there to go to Ottawa. It is this. I was going to say it's the seat of power here in federal Canada.
Right.
Of course, people might take issue with that, but it really is a lovely city. So we'll do that for 3 weeks, and we do go away a bit in the wintertime to somewhere where it's warm, and we travel a bit, and I continue to do bits and pieces of work, which is very good. It's very good for me to do that, to continue to be involved in ways that are helpful and supportive. You develop over your lifetime a set of skills and some passions for things, and when you become a pensioner, they don't just disappear, right? They're still there.
Right.
They're still you, and finding ways of sharing those that are helpful. Yeah, that's a good thing.
I was talking with someone at the end of June in Calgary, and she was talking about harvesting your career. That you acquire these skills throughout your career, and when she didn't like to use the word retire, that when you move to the next phase of your life, it's an opportunity to harvest those skills. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about, and I was actually going to lead with this, and it slipped my mind, was I was going to give you some credit for this show even existing. And I was trying to go back to the root of what that was, and I was thinking of the thesis proof.
Thesis proof.
Yeah, the classic upper elementary thesis proof, right? And
I can honestly say I have not thought or used that phrase in probably 2 decades.
Yeah. Well, and then I was thinking about a thesis proof, and then I was thinking about the work that we did with Pamela Adams and Carmen Mombriquet and yourself through the University of Lethbridge on generative dialogue and inquiry questions, and really, to me, that was like a grown-up thesis proof.
Yes.
To what extent, in what ways, and really, as when I submitted this project, it was to what extent, in what ways does a community impact one's identity, or vice versa. I can't remember exactly how I wrote it, and I was thinking I gotta make sure to let Sharon know that this came right from the thesis proof days.
There you go. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you framed this project that way, because I think it could be said that without a community, we don't have an identity. Like if we, I mean, an identity for a newborn is that family, right? But if we believe that who we are is forged in those relationships, in the social relationships that we have around us, if we don't have social relationships, how can we become anything, buddy?
Right. A philosopher would take that argument and say, like, if you were a single person alone on the planet, is it even possible to have an identity?
Exactly. Right? That's a very good question.
Right.
And if we will concede that our identity is forged within community, within social structures, then how do we make those social structures, that community, as rich and as robust as we possibly can, so that the identity that we develop is strong and purposeful and meaningful and forward looking, and generous, and I mean, I could think of a whole lot of words, because I think there is that follows from that, and I think that, and it's not like somebody's going to do that for us, make that community, because really we have to work on that as well, right? But we have to be committed to that. We have to understand that that's how we gather identity. That's how we forge it. That's how we construct it, and we have to contribute to that community. And so in that process, we have community.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap with those wise words.
I don't know about how wise.
Really appreciate you taking some time on a Sunday afternoon to do this. Yeah. Motivation Local is produced by Table 4 Productions with the generous support of TELUS Story Hive. You can find our episodes on Optic TV, at our website, motivationlocal.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer is Turner Saddlemeyer. Our theme music was composed by Medicine Hat musical artist Snakes and the Riot. As always, thanks for watching or listening to our podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel or to leave us some feedback.